7th regular meeting of the Eugene Water and Electric Board to order. First agenda item is going to be the agenda check. Is there anybody that is there anybody that has any changes or proposed changes to the agenda? If not, then the next agenda item is items from the board members and the general manager. Anything, Brad?
No.
I wanted to say thank you to all for organizing the rehearsal trip. It was really good. Learned a lot. It was great to connect with other people in the industry that are helping with the work that we do. So with that, we did attend the celebration of business. That was also really it's a fantastic event. I got to sit with one of the first citizens, and it was just fantastic to be able to, see what they're working on and where they're going, and be there to encourage. So I appreciate that opportunity, and also had a number of meetings with LCOG. I'm also on the audit committee. We just went through an RFP process to get a new auditor. LCOG, apparently auditors are in short supply, so I don't know when we go through our process next of selecting a new auditor, but if that comes up here in the near term, that I've heard that that's a challenging prospect. We only got one contract or one applicant. That's what I'm going to bring up.
Which high school was the future first citizen?
Sheldon.
I was just curious because
My alma mater,
a few years ago I was the future first citizen.
Oh.
A few years ago, like a long time ago. It's a fun event, I'll just say that.
It is. John Borowski.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Did we get Commissioner McCray back online? No. Did you get a call in, or?
Andrew's working with
Okay, you're working on it? Okay, I'll go back to him when we go, but I want to keep going so we can try to keep on schedule. And I have nothing, so we'll move on. Next agenda item is a public input, and we do have one individual that's signed up to speak. Before I open the public input, I'll read the public input. Actually, I'll open public input, and let's say when your name is called, please come forward and state your name, obviously your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time by watching the timer in front of the room or by listening for an audio notification when 3 minutes is elapsed. If you're participating by telephone, remember to unmute your call, press *6, calling from a landline, or simply use the unmute button if calling from your cell phone. Testimony is heard. Each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy we do not engage in back and forth dialogue. Please note that the failure of a commissioner to speak will not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If the question is presented by a speaker, the board will not provide an answer, and EWEB staff member will contact the speaker for the question to be presented at a later time. First speaker I have this evening is Twyla Jacobson, followed by Shepard. Just for the record, Ann, is there anybody on the phone? Okay. Twyla?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
President Brown, Vice President Carlson, and Commissioners. My name is Twyla Jacobson. I live in Ward 2. Thank you, John Borowski, if he's somewhere up there, for your service. I'm the co-chair of the CS Service Employees International Union 503 Climate Justice Committee and president of the State Retiree Local. But here tonight, I'm speaking for myself. I'm pleased to say that my electrical use was covered with a little bit on the positive side with solar panels on my home for the past 2 gray and cloudy months, which surprised me. I was very supportive, and I'm very supportive of the efforts that EWEB is making towards green options. As stated in your website, as an EWEB customer, you're already using clean, renewable energy and investing in McKinsey watershed protection. But together we can do more. So I am here this evening to ask that EWEB do more. Energy is not green or renewable if it leads to the extinction of the iconic species here in the Pacific Northwest, our salmon. tribal nations rely on salmon for food, cultural practices, and their very existence. A Nez Perce leader has stated, "There are no Nez Perce if there are no fish." North America's largest Pacific watershed, the Columbia River Basin hydropower dams, have been controversial because of their disastrous impact on salmon and the other 137 species that are part of the salmon food chain. Most of the Columbia Basin's 250-plus dams have played roles in the salmon's decline, but the 4 lower Snake River dams are prime targets for removal because their economic value has diminished and their absence would inordinately benefit salmon. Last fall, the Biden administration announced the long-running litigation where the Nez Perce tribe has sued the federal government, which includes the state of Oregon and a coalition of environmental and fishing groups as plaintiffs, would be paused while the two sides seek long-term solutions. Senator Murray and Governor Inslee of Washington committed to develop and deliver a comprehensive solution to protect and recover Snake River salmon and invest in the region's communities by July 31st, 2022, this year. And I think EWEB can be a positive force for helping BPA, the Bonneville Power Authority, modernize their system. The dams and their energy can be replaced. Utilities everywhere are replacing aging generation with new renewables. Federal infrastructure funds can be used now to build new energy. And it will also free up 144 miles of prime recreational site in Idaho, as well as help coastal fisheries, whale watching, and shore-based businesses throughout our region. Last year, the Nez Perce analysis by their Department of Fisheries Resource Management found 42% of wild Snake River spring Chinook populations and 19% of wild steelhead are tipping toward extinction. We are at a crisis state with salmon recovery, Tribal Chairman Penny said of the Nez Perce. I ask that you, as EWEB commissioners, represent the public, act as ambassadors for embracing a future that includes climate justice as well as the rights of future generations to a place that supports all life systems. We do not want to be the ones who will go down in history as those who did not act, not on our watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Thomas Shepard.
Hey people, it's me, Ego Chick, otherwise known as Tana Shepard from EWEB, Eugene let me start again, not really, just from Eugene 4J's Education Partnership. I'm a grant coordinator. This is my 5th year in the role, and I just want to thank you, as always, for continuing to support the funding of our dynamic and meaningful educational partnership. This year is a year 3 of unknowns, and so just kind of weathering through that, adapting to new ways of doing things, and basically what I've learned over the last couple years of what teachers actually need right now from our program. I also just want to share, I've been flying solo since October without an assistant, but we've just hired an assistant in 4J, so we should be a little more balanced than just me doing everything, because I am not a financial person. So again, this year I was compelled to serve in my role differently. I think this is kind of how things are going to start being, but learning just by listening to the teachers and supporting them. I've had a lot of teachers just reach out individually, like, what do you think of this? Can you help with that? And so it's just been a lot more on the spot, not the big projects still too, but more individual projects that are actually sparking a lot of ideas, especially around water education. So our program is a lifeline and a beacon of light for many of the teachers this year. While direct student connections have been less than typical, I'm managing to get into quite a few classrooms and actually online learning as well through Zoom. And teachers, as I mentioned, are reaching out to utilize all the offerings and really just my expertise. And so some highlights have been Wonder Wanders, which is new, but just taking kids and getting them outside and wandering around and noticing and wondering and talking about it. Water is Life mural, so some art out there. I've been helping with a lot of walking field trips because we haven't been able to have any volunteers. So I've been like the tried and true, let's get the kids outside. And then the wind energy has really taken off this year, as well as our newly rebranded EV challenge. So this week, many of the teachers, I have all 7 out of the 8 middle schools participating, which is a record. And so the challenges are site-based and they're happening starting tomorrow. And I'll be attending all of those events in the schools. EWEB will be out on Thursday at Kelly Middle School to bring communications out. And so hopefully there'll be some great footage and shots from that, and I'll make sure and share anything that I capture. And yeah, so we're kind of just gearing up for the end of the year and sinking into fall, and so really hoping to bring salmon tanks back into the classrooms, but it has been requested that I continue the virtual aspect, especially for online learners. They've really gotten a lot out of that. I've had actually people across the state utilizing that, so not just 4J people. So anyway, I just want to thank you again, and yeah, and it's good work, so thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else signed up or on the line? Ann? All right. Well, then I will close it, public input, and call for comments from commissioners. Comments from commissioners about what we heard this evening. Oh, yeah.
And just thank you for coming out and expressing your views. And I'm very curious to hear about how teachers, if they want the programs more, if you're seeing kind of a pushback on some of that, or if it's just a change in how they are operating. So at some point, if you have some time, we'd love to hear more about that. And thank you to Twyla for your information and expressing your views. Thanks.
Comments from commissioners? I'd like to thank both of you. Twyla, I'm very, very involved in both making sure we have an adequate energy supply and how we replace it with clean renewable energy, but also protecting the salmon too. So we all had an opportunity to go to Ice Harbor, but the logistics are brutal. It's 6 hours each way, and it was a tough deal to do. But I'm keeping track of what happens with the snake trip dams, because I'm kind of torn between both things. But I will say that the salmon are stressed not only by the dams, but I mean, just this year they closed the Sayre Slough and they've limited all the salmon fishing on the coastal streams because it's the ocean that's causing a heck of a lot of this problem too. So it's not just the dams, but the dams are an integral part. But thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. And Donna, thank you very much for coming again. When all your programs were on the chopping block and when we had them all out of the budget, it's the first time in my life I've ever seen the superintendent of every school district that we funded at that podium saying, please don't do that. And for you coming and telling us, it's very rare to have somebody that we supplement this program, for you to come and say, tell us what you do. So I really appreciate you coming and telling us what you're doing and keeping us surprised, even if it's quarterly or semi-annually or whatever. It really helps, and it helps keep us informed and stressing the importance of what you do. So thank you very much. Right.
I just wanted to make note, and this is for Twyla as some others. I do know that the City Club of Eugene in the end of July, I believe, is going to have a panel discussion around the Snake River dams. So we'll make sure we get that event posted on our calendar on our website. I know all the speakers personally, so it should be an interesting discussion. And then, Tiana, one of the things that's come up with the board, this is supposed to be a dialogue, but there's only 2 of them.
No, that's
I know, and I break that rule all the time, so it's okay. I'll break the rule, you don't have to.
So I know that this board has brought up in the past funding for private schools and also homeschool. And one of the things that I'd like to have staff or me get together with you on is your virtual options and how we can make that available to others. It sounds like you're already doing that, but maybe there's some things that we can do to facilitate that.
Yeah, totally. And I guess just in light of what Sonia was asking too, maybe there's a time that we can just kind of catch up and not in this format to just kind of be able to talk about it. That'd be great. I invite that.
Right, yeah, look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. The next agenda item is approval of the consent calendar. Calendar 8. Did we get McCray back yet?
Yes, still working.
Still working, thanks. Let me know when you get him back. Give him up. Would anybody like to make a motion to adopt calendar A? Moved by Carlson, seconded by Schlossberg. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Passes unanimously with a note that Commissioner McCray has been in attendance but didn't vote on this, but still those in attendance, but passed unanimously. Next agenda item is approval of consent calendar B. Motion to adopt.
Move to approve.
Moved by Carlson, seconded by Schlossberg. Discussion. Not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously by those involved. Next agenda item, moving right along, is the annual capital improvement plan. Frank and Rod. Frank Lawson, Rod Price, I'm sorry.
Are we doing this up here? You guys are with me. Yeah. I can push plenty of buttons. So President Brown, Commissioners, good evening. For the record, Frank Lawson, General Manager. With me this evening is Rod Price, Assistant General Manager, Tyler Nice, Electric Division Manager, and Wally McCullough, the Water Engineering Supervisor. We have a few things to go through with you this evening. We're kind of dividing this up into two presentations. And so what we're going to do is to run through a number of the different assumptions around capital planning. We have a number of things to talk about this month and next month relative to the opportunities for investments that we see. And so the first presentation, I'll give you a little bit of background about what drove the plan, what drove the present plan that we're executing. We'll then have Wally and Tyler provide the board with an update on the project. So where are we with what you all approved last summer? And then Rod and myself will kind of recap and assess kind of where we are from a macro level and some of the trends that we're starting to see relative to capital investments. This is, if you're familiar with Plan, Do, Check, Act, parts of continuous improvement, what we're really looking at over the next couple of months. Again, this month, we're going to kind of run through the, here's what drove us, here's where we are, here's the projects we're executing, here's some of the trends that we're seeing. And then next month, we're going to propose some adjustments to our investment strategies as well as our long-term financial plans that will take us forward. So we're presently executing the 2022 through 2031 plan. It seems odd that we're already into the 2030s. And then July, you will start to get your first visions of the 2023 through 2032 long-term financial plan as well as investment plans. For our discussion, really right now, the board is an integral part of what we do. Relative to the strategies that you develop, we're really talking about the green area here, the relationship between the guidance and the assumptions that you instruct us on, the policies, the strategy, and then we have this back and forth interaction between the investments we're making relative to capital plans, a lot of those driven by things like master plans and IERPs and other things. And then those interact with our financial assumptions, what's going on in the outside world, and also eventually developing into a model that we project out for at least the next decade with the finance team, Deborah Hart and her team, to really get into this is what this looks like for the utility for the next decade. We roll that back out to the right side of this diagram, which is then we start to look at what are the revenue requirements, what's the COSA start to look like to where we eventually end up with customer rates. And so several opportunities for the board to provide guidance, including in the process that we're in. Last year, some of the results when we sat down with the board was we wanted to make sure we were making the right investments and we were doing it in a way that would be acceptable to our customers from a financial perspective going forward. Where we landed was that the board instructed us that it was pretty fair to look going forward at benchmarking our rates relative to inflation. That was 2.1 to 2.9%. As we know, inflation is in a bit of a fluctuation at the moment, and so we're not anticipating doing long-term rates consistent with that level of inflation. But we also landed on an investment plan on the water utility north of 300 million, and on the electric utility just north of 450 million. And so those were investments that were planned out over the next decade. And the result of that was within the board guidance. So on the water side, 2.73%. The exception was the second water treatment plant, which put the average rate increase at 4.8. And then on the electric, it was 2.53. I won't talk about some of the refinements we're looking at. Rod and I'll talk about those a little bit later, but we are starting to see impacts of things like supply chains. These are things that we manage, and we manage them all the time. And we'll talk about some of the adjustments that we want to make going forward relative to emerging trends and issues. Not expecting you to read this. Basically, what we were trying to show here, last year the financial plan was within board metrics. It was within the policies. There were some yellow areas here and there, actually on the upper plan as well, spotty in the outer years. And those were where we were within 10% of the target metric. So we weren't in the red, but we were able to find a way to facilitate the investments that we proposed for both water and electric, and do that within the guidelines that the board had given us. Resulted in some rates that actually kept us in pretty good comparator position. If you recall, last fall was also the first year that we looked at a multi-year COSA, so we've actually projected out doing some smoothing over a 3-year period, and we'll provide some general updates to where that's going to take us in the long-term financial plan starting next month, but then we'll get in and verify where these numbers are headed. And you can see still in pretty good shape relative to our comparators. Water, even with the investment in a second treatment plant, went from the second most affordable to the fourth most affordable relative to our comparators, but even with a large investment. With that, I will turn it over to Wally and Tyler to let you know where we are with some of these investment projects, some pretty exciting ones. And Wally, you can start.
Yeah. Good evening, commissioners. As Mike mentioned, Tyler and I are going to be kind of just giving you an update on capital. We're going to start with doing a kind of quick recap of 2021. We'll look at what's going on in 2022, and then an overview of the next 10 years. I'm going to start first with the water side of things. And first, looking at 2021, we had a great year last year in water. Our capital investments pretty much equaled our capital budget. A tremendous amount of work done last year. Some big projects were our riverfront transmission main from headquarters down over toward the Knickerbocker Bridge. We completed the second phase of that. That's shown in the picture on the left as we're heading up, kind of turn south, go underneath the railroad tracks, heading to underneath the railroad bridge into UWEB toward Franklin Boulevard. We completed the excavation at our East 40th Reservoir, which is the biggest project we have on our capital plan currently. And several of you have been into the site there last year, so it's proceeding well. AMI met everything we were hoping for last year. A lot of capital expenditures on that, as well as a lot of material purchase, which helped us start of this year. Main replacements met all our goals, and lots of smaller projects. Everything was clicking last year, so it was good. Moving into this year, we are seeing some supply chain issues affecting some of our projects. AMI is one that got hit pretty hard with the supply chain. Little modules go on top of meters to communicate out. I think we can't get them. Dark census needs out there, but we're working on it. But we are down. We're down to about 90 to 100 a week, compared to 250 to 300 a week. At our peak last year. So we're hoping that's going to come up. And those supply chain issues, along with some of our contractual timing, we have our reservoirs are half of our capital plan, 40%, and it's a 2-year contract, and just a couple swinging in contract timing swings are overlooked. as far as communication. So we're probably going to be around 80% or something, but we're keeping an eye on that. Notable projects for 2022 would be, again, the reservoir project. The consent item was just approved, had our water system control upgrades, and we're really excited about, and working toward for a long time on the water side. A couple of projects up at Hayden Bridge this year, so a powder activated carbon improvement system to help get water quality. Some electrical work on our finished water pump station, which all the water in Eugene goes through that one pump station. It's a 24/7 operation, so exciting project there. And then some upriver projects, pump stations, and again, for mains, we're looking pretty good this year on main replacements. There was another main replacement on the consent item tonight. And we'll see probably one or at least maybe two again later on this year going to the board for approval. Looking at the kind of going through the 10 years, you know, we have all our normal work, which is kind of the small stuff that kind of is fairly consistent every year. It's all our compulsory work, like services work, developer work, our main replacements, which is probably the largest part of our type 1 work. Pump stations, upper level, reservoir projects. We have that. And then really didn't change much from the past. Plus we have our larger projects, and I have some slides on each of these, the base level reservoirs, transmission, and second source. And really the our proposed 10-year CIP is really the same as last year. What we're proposing this year, both in terms of projects and amount, dollar amount. Pretty much the same. We're still following our master plan. You know, we're building our resilient spine. We started 10 or 12 years ago with Hayden Bridge, went through that. And I've said this numerous times to the board. Went through that. Now we're moving into base level reservoirs and transmission. So we're in that a couple of years now. That's the plan going forward. First 5 years, the CIP is a little bit higher than the second 5. I really do this. Some second source money coming, another year second source money coming into the plan. Kind of that lump in the oatmeal or whatever Frank likes to say. We are redoing our master plan in 2025, and our CIP is really based on our master plan, and we redo that every 10 years. It's kind of required. And I don't see a lot of changes in big projects and direction of those with the master plan update, but it could affect some of our smaller type 1 projects and where we're going, especially in some of our South Hills areas. So, but more will be seeing something on it by 23, 24. There'll be some involvement with the board, some communications on our master plan. Getting into some of the project specifics, the biggest item in our 10-year CIP is our second source on the Lamb River. Construction in the proposed CIP is 25 to 28. I did shift some money out into 28, added another year onto that, and took some money up front because we are a little bit behind where we'd like to be as far as on approvals and getting that going. Areas that we're really working on there this year was really land use approvals. We got a work session with the city of Springfield. That'll hopefully give us some direction on what properties and where we're going and what will it take to get there. Permitting, we're getting some consultants on board just to get in our back pockets. We can kind of hit the ground running when we get those approvals and know exactly what we're going to be building and where. And then we'll be doing some value engineering on some of our, particularly the intake this year, just to look where we can save some money on that. So kind of getting ready so we know what we're doing. Take off. Next biggest item on our capital plan in the 10 years is our distributed storage. We have 6 base level reservoirs. We anticipate planned in the 10 years. That includes the 2 at East 40th, which is underway, and moving to Hawkins and College Hill. I think we have a pretty good handle on this program, and what we're really working on, and we want to ensure we do a good job at East 40th and be a good neighbor. All of these projects are in neighborhoods, and it just takes a few bad stories to sink things. So we want to make sure we're successful in being a good neighbor. Consistency in communications. We have really solid communications team on this, our East 40th project. We want to just keep that going. And then our CIP, we had some gap years, we kind of closed up just to maintain the work, so it just doesn't stop and start. And a lot of that's related to just keeping continuity in the communications on that. Then the last item I want to talk about is, pipes in the ground. That's our main replacements and our transmission projects. Our mains, we consider those are the small pipes that hook up to everybody's house. It's the picture on the right. Most of them are 8-inch diameter, but generally anything under 24 we consider a main replacement. The 10-year plan has an increased investment in main replacements. We're really looking to increase the mileage of pipes in the ground and kind of lowering some of our kind of KPIs on that. We're right on the threshold as far as breaks per mile. So we're really doubling the expenditures on that over the next 10 years. And then as far as our large pipes, these are like our Upfront transmission main. We have 8 of those in the 10-year plan. Some of those are associated with reservoirs. We're timing one for East 40th. It's timed with the city street rebuild at Hilliard. We have a big project, third phase of our river, the connector along the riverfront is being timed with the for 2024 and 2025, and the CIP, and that's timed with the city rebuild at Franklin. There's a lot of coordination there. On areas of kind of work and concern we have here, really this is where our supply chain issues really hit us. Those are our main replacements. There's a lot of creative material procurement, I'll call it, buying materials ahead of time, buying lots of pipe. Quinn's on the line here somewhere. He's shaking his head as how many times we ask him, can we put more pipe here? You move a vehicle, put more pipe. So working on that, and then also labor resources. It's a lot of divisions that take for main replacement work. It covers everything from engineering, obviously construction crews, but warehouse, fleet, purchasing. Just as we increase expenditures in that program, making sure we have the resources to complete our plan. There's some additional FTE in the long-term financial plan that will be proposed in July. I'm going to turn it over to Tyler.
Thank you. Would you mind? Oh, yeah, we can do one of the chairs.
Yeah.
Give a little action to the presentation.
Okay. I almost need a big mirror so we can see what's behind us.
Always a surprise. So Tyler Nice, the Electric Division Manager, for the record. I really appreciate the time tonight. For electric, similar to Wally, gonna look backward to where we came from, look at this year, and then look into the future. For 2021, I'd classify it as a great year as well for electric. We spent 85% of the investment we intended to on the infrastructure, and amongst all the challenges all the groups had with supply chain and staffing and all the buzzwords you hear, I think that was really great job for the teams. I did draw a highlight in this bullet on 100% close to for electric only efforts. What that is referring to is not that electric division staff only worked on that, but things that we're putting money into that are carrying power, delivering power to customers, or producing power at the plants. Those types of projects we've been performing really well on. When we look back the last 5 years, we're usually right around that 100% mark. Like Wally noted, with the large strategic projects, they might bump year to year, and that's okay, but some of this infrastructure work is really, we're spending really accurately on it. So proud of that as well for the teams. Notable projects, I'll really just hit the ones in the pictures through this, but ask me about any of the other bullets. The Fema storm mitigation is the one on the right there with a couple line trucks. That's down in South Eugene in the Saratoga neighborhood. That was actually from our 2016 storm. We got approval for that, finished it up last year. And this project was, or this picture was over a couple days when we had all the crews out in that neighborhood, and after all the underground was installed, there was an overhead to underground replacement, and they were moving all the overhead, opening up the skyline, getting things out of people's backyards. Really cool to see everybody out there doing that, and great for that system in the area. So some of that funding getting put for future storms and mitigation, so that's great. Moving into 2022 projects this year, it seems like we're almost the end of it, but for this year's projects, we're looking at a 70% spend. Really the two bullets there, supply chain issues and Carmen Smith delays. The supply chain for electric is focused on electric materials, mainly cable and transformers. We're needing to, they're in short supply and lead times have jumped up. But we are being, as Wally talked about, kudos to purchasing and kudos to especially distribution engineering and operations. We're looking at different design ways of that. We're actually refurbishing some units to maintain some stock. We're looking at alternate supply. So really, really proud of the teams. They're the ones that are seeing the customers. Some of this has resulted in customer delays for some work as of late. So they're the ones managing that. So even with that, we're still able to prioritize and move work along. Notable projects, the one on the left is a picture of the IP transmission loop restoration, that first one. It was a spooky day on October 30th last year, day before Halloween, much spookier than Halloween, because we did have that loop go down. Something that does not happen on that loop very often. It was a fault on a pilot wire, which is a communication wire. What we did is we found ourselves with a big capital project in our lap. Again, really proud of the teams, substation relay, a lot of the line departments and engineering as well. We did get that back in place last couple weeks ago. Picture on the left is another gift throughout that project that was a emergent breaker replacement in the middle based on testing when we were commissioning. So lots of good things in that project, lots of hurdles to overcome. The kind of thing I'd state about that one that delayed a lot of our other capital work into this year to assess that, being our #1 customer in connection to Upriver and Newton Bridge. So next slide, on the 10-year piece, our normal work. That's kind of our type 1 work, renewal and replacement, we call it in a lot of ways, services and compulsory projects that it's our obligation to serve. Also wrapped into that is kind of emergent replacements we need to restore. Really what we're doing is turning up the dials, increasing investment on some of that equipment I was talking about that we've been investing in, cables, transformers, poles, all that infrastructure that delivers the power, especially substations and transmission as well. Picture on the lower left is an example of that. That's our Alvita Curran line. We used to have a competition about who had the biggest crane in photos, but this one's pretty big. That was replacing insulators on the line for 2 reasons: one, age, and one, preparation for a large substation project coming up to ensure the reliability is there. It was a really great piece of work to get out of the way, line department. The one on the right, that picture is actually, got to thank you and the board wrapped in there. We did do approval last year for transformers, if you may remember, that you approved. This was a failed transformer that happened last year at Cal Young, and this is some of the doing something unheard of and showing people in this presentation, but it's the teams that work in the substations and scope this out. So this is like a team out scoping the work out for the replacement of that transformer. We're doing that later this year. We received those units earlier this year, so excited to get that back in place to reduce any system contingencies. Long-term strategic investments, that's our type 2, if you remember. Really in the plan is woven in 14 substation rebuilds. That's the number that's beyond or at or very close to end of life as we've assessed with our data and condition. We're also focusing on a resilient spine within there. That's this list of substations I'll talk about a little later that can really connects our central hub of Eugene to the upriver and maintains our customer load. And also, like I said before, there's the power carrying equipment, transmission distribution, some of the overhead transmission replacements, but also we'll have in there a cable replacement plan that'll add about 15,000 feet of cable replacements a year. Electric AMI is one to note. We did have classified severe supply chain issue with that, just no meters, so we have halted that this year so that we can maintain stock for new connections, replacements. We're about 71% deployed right now, and fingers crossed when we get those early next year, we'll be back on track. We're engaging with the contractor this year and be ready to take off in 2023 for completion in 2024. Moving on to generation. Same grouping, type 1, 2, and 3. Type 1, similar to the electric side and water side, ongoing replacements to maintain condition and age of the equipment at the various plants and the dam facilities. Also, type 2, really one piece in there is a turbine generator overhaul. That unit's going to be due. It's getting some work this year and next on the kind of switchgear side of it, but for the turbine generator, keeping that resource reliable is going to be very important. And then Carmen Smith improvements, that's spread throughout the plan still. First 5 years really is focused on finishing out a lot of that infrastructure work in the plants and renewal, and then starting up the kind of fisheries recreation, and then finishing out everything in the last half of the plan. Something that's been on the budget for a long time, and we are seeing lots of progress to that, so kudos to the generation folks. Also notable, as you're aware, big decision this year for the Leberg and options analysis, what to do with that. Right now what we have is a $20 million placeholder in there, and really what that is for is to account for any interim measures we might have to take that might evolve. Later this year, we'll have a decision from the board with input from staff on that, and we'll update the plan and the modeling and everything with updated costs later. From the 10-year overall, really we have the same scope and goals. It has increased in cost due to inflation and some of the estimates that have come in on the larger suites of work. Type 1, really the goal is to establish a lot of asset replacement programs. We haven't been able to fund kind of programmatic replacement of things, of different equipment. We're really going to be looking at these metrics and tuning those to maintain a reliability. That's things like line miles, number of transformers, number of breakers replaced, and then looking at age. Type 2 is really focused on enhancing resiliency for the highest impact loads. I'll talk a little about those later, but and also the risk-based rebuilds, looking at not just the age, but also the risk of it to the community, to the customer base. And then we have some emerging trends there, and there's some of them we've been living for a while with, some of them that are coming. So safety is one, as we talked about with Leberg. Wildfire is one that we'll be talking more about in the next board session incoming, that we've woven investments into that are mitigating, increasing telemetry, and reducing risk of wildfire for customers in EWEB. Electrification is one that we don't have woven in the plan as of yet, but we're in close contact with our power planning folks. We have really good capacity on the transmission and substation level, but as we move forward and get more data analytics, understand the impacts of that as policies and our data roll in, we'll be looking more into the distribution system and injecting that in as we get more info. And then the one we don't want to forget about, not in the news as much anymore, but subduction zone earthquake. That one we have effectively put into our processes for especially substations and generating facilities, seismically rating new installations and retrofitting some and others. So, and then type 3, as I said, continuing on with the relicensing work. Little graphical representation, a map of the system here. And really what this box around it is highlighting that resilient spine, as we call it. It really connects a suite of our main hub to the system with BPA, connects us to Upriver, connects us to the water plant, and really, you know, as I talked about, 14 over 38 substations, and this is kind of the order of them that they would roll out in across the system. And we're focusing on the resilient spine first. A little focus on that. What do we mean when we mean risk? Well, risk equals probability times impact. And so for us, the probability is driven by condition of equipment, age of equipment, outage history, ops experience. That kind of gives us an indication of how likely something is to fail. Impact is more, you know, not just customer count, but that is an important one, but also customer impact, both to community and the system. And then really the main risk in our plan and that we're managing to is what happens if one of these things pop before we get to substation or breaker or generating plant X in 7 years. And it's really these increasing some of our spare stock, especially with supply chain, making sure we have things on hand, ordering early and timely. We may have to go in and do, you know, interim repairs or upgrades, you know, like if you want to go rehab your kitchen, you might have your faucet break before you're ready. You might have to do a little tweak in there. So we may find ourselves doing things like that and then coming back later and really prioritizing that on risk. And another unthinkable thing, showing the water plant in my electric presentation, but resilient spine, that's one of the main pieces of the spine is we have international paper on that loop, current substation, that's the intersection of I-5 and 126, large substation off to the right there if you're going towards the McKinsey, and you look at it every time. And then Hayden Bridge, and then Upriver, of course. We also have support shared services in the plan, and really the things this year and in the next few years we're focusing on headquarters sale preparation. It's going to be this year, as you know, it is for sale right now, lots of infrastructure work, but also logistics that we're handling, and then also expansion here at the Rock. Bertelsen property, and really that's in the design and planning, focus on resiliency, flexibility, and I know you have some correspondence on that, but also see some construction happening there. And then fleet, we need equipment and trucks to do our work, and those are, as you see, littered throughout to make sure we get in to be able to achieve this work. That really thankful for that. And another exciting project that I'm going to pass to Rod is that we're excited about is our EES project.
Yeah, excuse me. So good evening, commissioners and everybody in virtual land. This is a really exciting project for EWEB. We can't hook a crane to it, so I can't put a crane picture on this, unfortunately, but this is foundational to the future of how we do business in our work, and it's really going to transform the entire utility. And we've got a lot of people working on it. There's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about it. We're in the RFP stage right now, evaluating some contenders for some of the software and the product behind it. Everything's going really well to schedule. It does take piece of the capital plan for sure. It's a multi-year project, but things are going really well on it. I think you'll expect to see Travis here in the fall with set items dealing with the work, the software, and probably the system integrator. So I got to get the tail end in the last project, so we're going to pause right here for any comments, questions, and discussion.
First, I'd like to say, this is information only. We had 30 minutes scheduled. We used 30 minutes for the presentation. So we're going to keep going. We're way ahead of schedule on that. So if there's questions or comments, because we have capital improvement planning and project update 2, and that asks for direction. So that'll be short.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that the way that this was split, it was a little bit funky. That'll be a lot shorter presentation. So
that's fine. I'm just
from a timing perspective,
where they wanted to go time-wise, because the blinking light. So anyhow, anybody have any questions or comments before we? Technically, we're scheduled for a break, but we're 30 minutes ahead. So if you want to keep going, we can. So people have questions or comments on what we've seen so far? Sonia, go ahead.
On the pipes and the transmission line, I don't remember where our KPI is for how old the system is, kind of average age of the system versus where we're at.
Our average age, we're actually a pretty young system on our distribution mains. I think we're right around 40 years. All of those built in the 70s, 80s.
Similar vintage. I don't have the age of system metric, but I do know on transmission we're behind right now, but it is similar build out of that timing when all the substations were built, the city was building.
Okay. On the East 40th project, can you remind me of the timing where we're supposed to be at, and are there any supply chain issues there that we're running?
There's minor supply chain issues with some piping and things, but it's long enough. Lead time is not affecting the project. We're going to be in operation by next July. And that's the current plan. It will take about 6 months to wrap up the whole project. So hoping to wrap it up 95% of it by the end of 2023.
And my last question, what is telemetry?
Oh, telemetry, like getting data from somewhere else back to your dispatch hub. I think that was, I was talking about wildfire, for example. A lot of companies are looking into increasing their data gathering from weather stations or partnerships. So that's one thing we're trying to do.
Other questions or comments? John B.
Thank you. So just a question as far as process going forward. In other CIPs that I've dealt with other agencies, we would get a project by project list with funding, identified funding to be identified, these types of things. That's something that we'll be looking for. Will it be broken down? You know, this transformer is scheduled for 2024 and it's going to cost us this much, or is that not the type of detail that we'll be seeing?
So Commissioner Borowski, the different classes of projects that were mentioned, a type 1 project, you would not see a project by project breakdown. A lot of that is routine basis, we have 22,000 distribution transformers in the system, for example, and we're not specifically identifying which ones. So type 1 project generally go off of metrics at, I'll call it a bulk level. The type 2 projects, you will see in the capital planning process, the schedule and the cost estimates on a project or program by program or project by project basis. You'll see that at the type 2 level and the type 3 level. So it's a combination of both of those that you'll see.
Okay. And then one other question, when you showed the map with the substations that were going to get redone, is the large street substation on that? Because I've got constituents that are complaining about the noise from that substation. I talked to Rod about it, and I went out and did a walk around, and just wondering if that is, if it's the the one that says number 12 on it, what time frame would the 12th substation get replaced?
That one is later in the plan, but that one we are looking at, we are doing a study on the sound analysis of that station right now.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the number 12 there, and I'm glad that you're looking at some other sorts of mitigation possibly before the actual replacement. But it is on the list to be replaced. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Just a clarification from Mr. Nice. Does new equate to quieter, or are there other measures? We've done sound walls, we've done other things for mitigating noise, and that is right in the middle of a neighborhood, like a lot of them. But just because it's not new on the list doesn't mean there's other types of mitigation.
That's true, yeah. There's other things we can do.
Other comments or questions? Matt?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Sorry, I joined a little late, technical difficulties. Thank you to Andrew for helping me get back in. I have a handful of questions here. With the FEMA storm mitigation, I think it's a great investment wherever we can afford to do it, especially if we can get federal help. I'm curious how we prioritize locations where we've moved overhead lines to underground.
For when we apply for those FEMA grants, we have to do a cost benefit analysis, and then we have to supply data for that, and we get help with that from FEMA. So it's really determined on your benefit of such a project. So it has to be a cost benefit to be able to launch and get those funds.
So it's likely based on, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was based on past reliability in past events. So we'll look at outage history, both in on a normal day and also for larger storms. And it has to be somewhere that's been hit multiple times and is kind of a trouble area. So that's how that one rose to the top of the list. Great,
thank you. And is it just one project that we did? Then we haven't done that in multiple parts of town over the last several years?
We have done, I think we did 16 total. I think 13 of them were on the, minor side, and then we had 3 larger ones that were these overhead to underground. And we're still doing the third one, or launching the third one. We got approval for that late last year, actually. So you can see there's a lag in the funding.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. The next question is, how much does seismic performance drive our improvements? Do we have a sense of which parts of our systems, both electric and water, are most seismically vulnerable? And do those parts get prioritized for replacement or replaced earlier than they would otherwise?
I think on the water side, it's really our resilient spine that we're focused on. It's all of our, the older systems are more susceptible to seismic activities. We used to not restrain our pipe. The newer systems we do, but it's really, we go for the bang for the buck. So we seismically upgraded Hayden Bridge because it serves everybody. Now we're going to seismically upgrade our reservoirs and their transmission because they serve everybody. And then, at the same time, we'll slowly focus in, and we are targeting older pump stations and things like that. So it's kind of scattered throughout the facilities, but that's how we're handling it on the water side. That makes sense.
For electric, first thing we do is look at critical loads and connections around our system. And then we'll go to each one of those sites and do a gap analysis, we call it, where we look at, okay, what's the difference between it being seismically operated and where we're at now? And then that kind of develops a scope. And then what we've been doing is going through those stations that need those and putting those on the capital plan each year. The ones we've been focusing on to start with typically is transformers. So we've been doing multiple transformer anchoring per year, so that, because those are your kind of bang for the buck is a good word, your highest lead time, highest cost, most important piece of work. Once we're done with those, we'll go back, start doing control buildings, and then there's other things you can do to protect from damage. You're really just limiting the amount of work you have to do after the earthquake, and so, but it's mainly driven by criticality, and then if it's seismically rated or not. After we're done with all those, then we'll start fanning out beyond that, but we're still on the most critical loads first.
Great, thank you both. That's super helpful. All right, and then the last question is about the 20 million set aside for Leberg for mitigation, and I'm trying to wrap my head around, is that just a fund in case we have something come up between now and the time we make major investments in that facility, or is that the budget that's kind of the starting place for those major investments in that facility? Is that question clear?
Commissioner McCray, that was just a number we stuck in last year to cover some incidental issues that might emerge in the short period of time that we were in the midst of assessing. The assumptions around Leberg will change dramatically over the next month as we meet with the commissioners on the 16th, and then we start to incorporate what some of those new placeholders will look like, depending on the direction that we're starting to receive. It is. I don't want to talk about sticker shock yet, but 20 million is going to be buried in the noise.
Yeah, no, that's why I was asking. I was concerned if that was the budget that we were setting aside for major improvements, but it sounds like that's just a placeholder so that we have funds to work with in the near term. So thank you for the clarification. That's all I have. Thank you, Brown.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to jump in with a few. So can you go back to the slide with the 14 substations, please? So aren't all the first 5 in Springfield and up the river?
Yeah, well, not the current substation, number 1 that we're working on this year, but the rest are, yeah.
80% of them. So
Yeah.
if we had a shift from, if we said if somehow negotiated with Lane Electric or Sub to take over that territory, could they serve that area and offset our capital needs of having to redo all those substations?
No, really the only one is, and I don't think it would apply, is Walterville, is that number 4 up there.
But that's a brand new one, isn't it?
It's some of the parts are brand new, but this one would really be converted from when we get rid of some of that transmission line, it would go into the distribution system is some of the change, but really it's Hayden Bridge, IP, and our Thurston substation, which are all critical loads, and then Thurston connects to BPA in the larger system.
So, yeah, I'm just wondering, isn't 4 the one we just built right up by the lever?
No, that's, no, that one's a little farther.
Okay.
That's the screen. This one is at Walterville Power Plant.
And all of those are in Lane Electric, or how many of those are in Subs District?
Well, 2, 3, and 5, I guess would
2,
be.
3, and 5 are in Sub, and so we're putting new substations in surrounded by Springfield Utility Board.
Well, the intricacy I'd point out, those the number 5, 3, and 2 are not serving like general customer class load. The Thurston substation, we do a backup to the hospital partnered with Sub, but that's more of a transmission station, one of our very few ones. 2 is Hayden Bridge Water Plant, and then 3 is the IP plant. So,
okay. All right, thank you.
No like neighborhood customer.
And then the second one, I saw one of your slides saying you're going to amend your 10-year plan from 3% annual inflation on construction cost of 5. Did I see that correctly?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Thank you. Okay, then, because I got a real challenge with that, so, especially with the construction costs. So, all right, well, if that's it, then I just need a kind of a direction from people. We're scheduled to take a break at 6:55. It's 6:30. The next agenda item is scheduled for 30 minutes, but Frank said it's not going to be 30 minutes. Do you want to push through the next agenda item, then take a break, or you want to take a break now? Okay. I'm not going to let the other John and Matt vote because they get to take a break whenever they want. They just click their camera and go. What, you guys like to take a break? Okay, we're going to adjourn for 10 minutes and come back. Thank you. Oh no. I don't know.
And it's not crystal clear. Right.
Hello, EWEB. We're getting ready to reconvene the meeting. Can I get a vote that you can hear us okay?
I can hear you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to reconvene the June 7th, 2022 regular meeting of the Eugene Water and Electric Board. The next agenda item is number 9, the Capital Investment Planning and Project Update, Part 2.
Part 2. Good evening, commissioners, again in virtual world. I wanted to start this conversation with something I often tell employees, and that is this is a really good time to work at EWEB. And the reason I say that is because the investments we're making in this capital plan have huge impacts on our community and future generations. These are legacy projects. You know, you think about EES, you think about our second source, you think about Carmen Smith, you think about rebuilding all these substations. These are just really great opportunities for us all to impact the future of UW and our community. So one of the things that I'm going to do here is you got a lot of details from Tyler and Wally, so I'm going to try and pull it up a little bit and do some summary kind of things to help you think about the plan a little bit and what we're going to do next week or sorry, next month. So one of the things, a couple things Frank talked about was, you know, we expanded our plan last year, our 2022 capital plan. It met all the metrics and the guidelines and everything we talked about last year. And I hope you picked up on the themes that Tyler and Wally really talked about, which is the reason that the increase is really going towards those risk-based investments. And so those investments are really in our resiliency project and replacing aging infrastructure. And so that's what's going on with the increased capital plans that are expanded, I guess is what we've been calling. Another thing that you may have picked up on a little bit is, Wally alluded to it, but we've been pretty successful at our planning and budgeting and execution of our projects. So what I wanted to do is just take a minute and do kind of a look back, you know, how have we done in the last 5-6 years? And so part of the CIP that gets presented in your CIP is a 5-year look ahead, right? And so I went back to 2016 and looked at the look ahead number for the next 5 years. And in water it was about $77 million, and in electric it was about $206 million. So what we did is we totaled up the numbers and see how we did. Now water's an overachiever here, so they spent a little bit more than they said they would, but still we're doing pretty good. Electric, 88%, which is very good considering the amount of numbers and projects and the amount of money we're spending. The biggest factor in that 88% is Carmen Smith and the relicensing project and moving big rocks around and delays and getting that, basically getting the license. So it was more of a timing thing. If you look at the type 1 and type 2, especially both in water, they come in at 100%. And so very, very diligent and good planning and good work going on. We also do every year, based on the CIP, we do budget for next year. So when we come to you in July, we'll bring you next year's budget. So I took a look at the average every year for the past 5 years. And again, water's leading the pack, but again, the Carmen Smith relicensing impacts that year-to-year budget. So it's moving those big rocks. But type 1 and type 2 are again very, very solid, very consistent for the actual budgets. Probably a couple other things you picked up on was some of the impacts to the capital plan. So there's emerging risks. You know, when we make these projections, what are the risks? What are the things that may impact the future plan? And we've, John, at the break, we were just talking about inflation for one, right? So there's a lot of inflation going on. And so that reduces the buying power of this plan, these plans, and it could impact on the long term how much we get done. If we keep our same goals, the money you have might be less to get those goals done. What we're really looking at though, in the plan we're going to bring you in July, is we expect the impacts of inflation to be around 2 years. So what we're going to do is, instead of using the normal 3% inflation rate, now inflation, this number contains construction, labor, all these kind of things buried within it. And Deb will probably go through that intricate detail next time, but we're going to put a higher value in the next 2 years for inflation to see how that impacts the capital plans. We talked about supply chains a lot. I think there was a thing in the GM report that detailed out some of the things we are doing to address supply chain issues. And again, that's expected to be an impact of 2 to 3 years. Really, the impact in my mind is mostly material delays and these price spikes. And so that's impacting our ability to get work done in the next couple of years. I think you've seen some of the material about how we're delaying some projects, getting really creative about rescheduling and deciding what we're going to do. Big shout out to Quentin in purchasing and their whole team for really being creative, working with the engineering and planning teams. Doing some interesting things in looking at products and getting products buying from major utilities. So some good things going on there to manage that. I think one of the big concerns is, and I labeled it as dam safety, and so Lieberg I think is a good example of that, where you have some pretty large assets there that could cost a lot of money depending on how we move things around. So these are long-term expenses that can be pretty large. What we're doing right now, though, is and we kind of talked about this a little bit for Lieberg, putting some dollar amounts in there. So if we're directed to do something immediately, we can do something immediately. So it's, in this case, it's $20 million for Lieberg. Now the board's going to have lots of opportunities moving ahead here to have discussions about what to do with Lieberg, and then the FERC is going to have some opportunities to weigh in on that decision, I'm sure, as well. So these are long-term impacts that we don't really understand and know yet. So if you go back to our conversation last year, if you looked at the water department and the water budget, we brought you two values. We brought you one with the second source in and one without the second source. And so those constituted, without the second source, we meant all the metric and rate targets. If you add in the second source, which is a choice, and it's a big number, it'd be very similar to something that would happen here. So we would have these, as we learn these costs, we'll bring them to you in these sort of big chunks with some of the impacts to all the other things that we look at. So that's to come. AMI, we've talked a lot about. I think the really kicker here with AMI is not so much the cost or the impacts as much as it is to the strategic goals we have around data, customer consumption, impacts on our power planning, and some of these kind of things, products and things that we really want to do moving ahead. But we do expect, hopefully as early as next June, to get started with the migrated water systems right now, but still installing meters. One of the things that has happened, and Tyler alluded to this, increasing compulsory work, which is really just another way of saying dealing with failures, right? We've got old stuff. A lot of things are in the 40s and 50s. And that stuff's getting to end of life. I mean, reading the canals and some of these things, right? So as those things fail, they move from risk-based projects and programs, they move into that compulsory just like that, right? So you lose your opportunity to plan, you lose your opportunity to make choices, and so you have to stop and work on these compulsory things. And that's Tyler alluded to that. We've had about almost delay in some of our risk-based work to work on IP and some of the other substations. Labor is also a challenge. I think you heard that from both of them. I would say though that it's probably, that's a traditional thing. Labor and inflation is things we always sort of deal with, especially in water though, or excuse me, in electric. with a little bit of slowdown in the next couple of years, we're going to try and energize and beef up fill all the technical positions we need to create standards and get plans together and get those folks up and trained so that some of the slowdown effects that we just talked about really engage the plan moving ahead. So, and of course, contracting is an option, but we've also had this. That's probably more of a 5-year challenge. So just again, in summary, this is an impactful time to work here. We've got a lot of things that we're rolling in on. We expanded our plan last year to increase resiliency in aging assets. Really, we've done a lot of work to show that we can manage these budgets. We've had a lot of cooperation. We do a lot of meetings. We do a lot of work with finance and other departments to manage the budgets, and I think that's going really well. We feel like there's a lot of these issues, most every one of them we're addressing in one way or another. And then what we're going to do is work with finance to bring a plan that includes these adjustments that I've talked about, plus anything that of course the board lays in on as part of our long-term financial plan next month. So with that, we can stop and have a discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Sonia?
The first slide that you had up had the cost as kind of a metric as percent of completion. It somewhat seems like that's a little bit conflated. Is there any way to separate the two? Because, cost and the amount spent could be a factor of inflation or not being able to control costs versus what I think you're trying to measure is how much of the work did you plan to complete versus completed. And I'm just curious if there's a way to separate those two out a little bit so we can really get a sense of here's how much we plan to complete, here's how much was completed, here's how much we plan to spend versus how much was actually spent. And just, if there's some way to decouple those two, that would be appreciated. And then you mentioned the inflation rate, but you didn't actually say what inflation rate you were using for next year. So
Yeah, so John's probably going to ask this anyway. So normally what we've done is use 3% as an average inflationary rate. So what finance team has selected is 5 or 5.5% for the next 2 years. And I think if Deb's on, she may have.
Let me weigh in a little bit
Okay.
on this too. So what we typically do is we talk to a number of economists around what does long-term inflation look like. And that's where historically we've gotten numbers anywhere from 2.1 to 2.9. We historically used 3 as an overall number, just to account for the fact that today's dollars and dollars in the planning horizon that we're looking at will be different. The value will be different. And to your point, that affects the scope and the rate of which you're doing projects. What we're hearing from economists now, number one, is it's pretty volatile, and so there's some discrepancies around how long is the inflationary pressure, are the inflationary pressures going to last. That's part of what we would want to get some feedback from the board on, because there's a couple of ways to handle it. We've made the assumption, at least initially, that it's something greater than 3. It could be 5. In the next 2 or 3 years. Those are things that we're having discussions around to account for the fact that there's this pressure. The reason that we wouldn't take some segment, and I think President Brown is right, if you look at certain products or certain segments, you're going to see double-digit inflation in things like contracting and certain components, but we also have other dials that we work with. And so when you start to apply inflationary factors that are larger, do you then manage your plan by saying, well, at 5% we can afford this, or at 10% we can afford that, and you start to actually shift and maneuver projects around as part of your mitigation as well. If you went by an absolute, gosh, I did say the wrong thing. If you go with a specific project schedule, then you're going to be looking at more of a near term, 1 year, 2 years at a time, and it may be different than that 5% or 6% or wherever we land. It sounds like that, and the trade-off for the board is that the larger numbers you put in there, potentially the larger impact you have on rates. So there's a trade-off there, and we can make, that's part of what we want to get feedback on the board from is, is it fair for us to put a different number in the early years? We've also looked at how we do our scheduling. That's both a labor issue as well as a timing issue. So what you might see next month or some projects shifted around a little bit. We thought this was in 23, maybe it's in 25. And so those are some of the pieces of feedback that we'd like to get from the board. But we did start with a 5%.
I guess, what other guidance did you, what other questions or guidance were you looking for? Is there other specific questions or just how do we feel about the inflationary rates?
I think it was more, is there something that you think we're missing in the process? One of the things that I felt like last year was the first time we'd really asked up front, here's sort of the rate guidance that we would want. We picked an inflationary guidepost, for example. Is there something else? I mean, we do have some supply chain issues, but I will say that over the course of a long-term plan, these are things that we manage. These are, labor resources always go up and down, financial resources always go up and down. I feel like EWEB's done a really good job of planning for the horizon. And one thing Rod did not mention, which is an emerging thing as well, is there is now different financial options. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, for example, we have a group that we've put together to look at different kinds of financing. So not all of this has the potential to fall back directly on rates. So those are the kinds of the things that we're looking at. But really part of the question is, yeah, inflation, that's one question. Sounds like there's review that we could look at on that. And another thing is, are we missing anything?
I don't see that we're missing anything from my perspective. I do appreciate the look at the inflationary piece, but balancing that with rates. So if we have to push projects to keep it in a reasonable space, I would be there. And then on the other supply chain side, I mean, that's going to continue to be an ongoing issue, but I understand that we have this longer term. So that's it for me. Thanks.
The one thing I did hear, Commissioner Carlson, is that a little bit of further breakdown as to the scope of work, not just the rate of investment, would be helpful. And I think we can do that. Again, the type 1, type 2, type 3 lend themselves towards kind of different types of feedback for the board, relative, sort of mass metrics on the type 1 and then project specific on the type 2 and 3.
If we forget on the IP one, when is our contract with IP? How does that balance with the?
Yeah, I'll have to check on that. It was sometime in 2023, I believe.
John B.
Thank you. So a couple of things. This all lends into going into our budget act and where we're going to go with that. And for me, this is a 10-year CIP and long-term financial plan. And so we're all worried right now about inflation. A recession could come in the next 2 to 3 years that could drastically impact that. So I think that the utility has positioned itself well to withstand inflation. And one of the tools that I see that we have at our fingertips or at Deborah's fingertips is our reserve funds and our rate stabilization funds. I think rate stabilization could easily offset 1 or 2% of inflation on any specific project. So that's something that I see last month when we were seeing those numbers being transferred and going quite high, you know, when you're talking $26 million in a reserve fund in electric and 10+ million in water, that always gave me pause, but using that as a hedge to, you know, take care of some of these short-term things, I think it was a wise choice. The next question I have is, what percentage of these long-term big projects do you think will be bonded as opposed to paid upfront from ratepayer or savings?
So I think that Commissioner Borowski, those are some of the questions that we will get into next month specifically when the finance team brings back in essence, the year-by-year cash flow for the next 10 years. Historically, there's been more frequent borrowing on the water side than there is on the electric side. And an example of that would be we would need to do some kind of financial mechanism for a secondary treatment plant, as an example. So that's a detail that we'll present next month when we get into the specific next year view of the plan. I will say one comment about your reserves observation. I do think that that's an accurate statement. I would also say that most of the buildup in reserves was for obligations that we have already made, for example, with Carmen Smith, where this is now a relicensing obligation to those in the settlement parties and part of the license obligation. So those aren't necessarily just free funds to completely use for rate mitigation, but your observation is right. When you have financial headroom and solid reserves, it does give you some ability to dampen things like inflation. So that's correct.
Yeah, and I was just going, I mean, if you think about on a small, you guys are thinking on grand scales. Well, I think on a small scale. And if I'm doing a remodel or if I'm doing something at my house, I keep it, you know, there's a contingency amount. Because when you open up a wall, you don't know if there's dry rot in there. You have to have that contingency amount. And I'm glad that EWEB has that. And I see as a difference between a 3% rate of inflation and a 5%. That hopefully that would fall into a contingency account. So that's what I'm thinking.
And I think also one of the biggest noticeable changes between what you actually received in last year's long-term financial plan versus the one that you'll see on July 5th is that there will be a substantial financial requirement associated with the Lieberg project, not something that we at a level where we would historically not just burden the ratepayers with that. It's going to be substantial enough that, and you'll learn more about that in 2 weeks and a half, next week, sometime upcoming. And so that'll be a significant requirement put on the electric utility.
You good, John? Good. Any other questions or comments? Mindy?
I apologize if this is a very basic question, but we had projected out what rates were going to be for the next several years. And we did that before the world kind of flung all this at us, right? Really before we knew how long the pandemic was going to last, the supply chain, all that stuff. And so how much do you anticipate that we would have to revise those rates based on what you've given us tonight? I mean, how much are you already putting together like numbers for that, or is that something that?
Yes, we're putting together numbers for that. There will be trade-offs that the board can evaluate in this process. And you know, one of them there will be There will be rate pressures that occur because of things that we have to do. Those are the compulsory work, typically obligations like licensed obligations. There's not as much flexibility in those. There's some degree of flexibility in how you finance those or when you finance those. There is going to be a trade-off, and those numbers will bounce around a little bit, and that's what we'll be talking to the board about as those sort of shift and move. Do we look at that over the next year or two? How does that impact our sort of next budget cycle versus the overall revenue requirement that you tend to see multi-year on the long-term financial plan? You know, I think the interesting thing, and Rod made the observation, from a comparator perspective relative to other utilities in our area, and especially other utilities outside of our area, we're very well positioned from a rate perspective. That is much different than we were, for example, 10 years ago. That gives us a lot of headroom to maneuver, even on the rate side. And because of how the system evolved in Eugene, both water and electric, this board has the opportunity, I'll say it that way, to really make some legacy type of decisions. And Rod used the term, it's a really impactful time, exciting time to work at EWEB. That's because a lot of these things are multi-generational, and the board is participating in that. And it's a matter of how we want to make the trade-offs between sort of the near-term rates versus the long-term benefit. And that's why you're here, and that's sort of exciting to think about. Doesn't look very excited.
You good, Mindy? I have a kind of a question and a comment about it, if I may. To me, the most important thing you had up there, Rod, was AMI, because if we're all these pressures from Blvd and from wages and from everything that's going to go on, and to make our owner customers be able to afford this and electrification, AMI is critical that we get it in, because they can't have time of use. We can't, you know, to allow them, give the people the tool to make the financial decisions to afford our product, because I'm scared to death about what rates are going to do with all the things we have pushing on this. I mean, we've got a lot of things that aren't financially feasible coming up. You know, Blvd's one. We're going to spend all that money and we're going to get no revenue. So that's just my perspective there. As far as the 3 or 5%, I don't think the petroleum thing's going away in the transportation sector. So I'm not an economist or anything, but I would still think 5% is light. But we have reserves for a reason, like John B2 said, and I think if we have to use them, we have to use them. So I'm okay with 5% for short term, but I think we may have to make another adjustment. So thank you. Anything else from anybody else on this topic? If not, then we ended it with a couple minutes to go. Anything from staff? Do you have what you need from us? You have to ask for direction, and you get the direction you want.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you good? Okay. Thank you very much. All right, the next thing, agenda item, board policy update, GP7. Frank, stay up here.
Good evening, commissioners. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm still sitting here. My back's getting a little sore in these chairs. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about some policy updates here. This actually, if you look back to the beginning of the year, we went through our annual policy review. There were really 3 policies that the board had identified that were opportunities in your perspective for us to take a look at, as well as develop a new one. SD 15 rolled over from last year. We made an update to the climate change policy. The other 2 were SD 3, which is a customer service policy that's on the agenda, and then the one that we're talking about tonight, which was a GP 7, which was some parliamentary procedures updates to take a look at, and wanted to kind of walk through a few of our observations about the policy. One of them is just, in general, this policy defines roles and responsibilities on the board. It also provides guidance relative to board attendance, for example. And one of the questions that had come up, especially over the last year, was what qualifies for attendance. Seems like feedback just individually from the board that in-person or virtual attendance, especially those who are listening virtually online right now, might consider that they're in attendance tonight. Virtual, in-person would both qualify for attendance at regular board meetings, and that would be what our thought would be based on feedback from you. Some of the other questions come relative to a couple other definitions. One is a quorum, for example. It specifically calls out 3 board members. In the context of the fact that this policy also talks about board replacements, a quorum could consist of a majority of members of the board. So what that would mean, in the case if you only had 4 board members, that you would need more than 2. One of the things that Robert's Rules of Order defines is that something doesn't pass or isn't affirmative at 50%. It has to be more than 50%. And so in these 2 items, so for example, a quorum could consist, and let's say under a future condition that there were only 3 board members for some reason. If 2 actually got together, that could be considered a quorum, which would be considered a quorum. So the little bit more broad language around a quorum consisting of a majority of board members seems to make some sense, as well as board actions requiring an affirmative vote of a majority of the board. So if you had 4 members again, you would have to get 3 votes for a resolution or an action to pass in that case, as opposed to mentioning three commissioners specifically because we have 5 under normal conditions. And then finally, vacancies on the board. This is something where a couple of sort of questions and feedback. There is the opportunity, if a board member should resign, that the remaining members have an opportunity. And one of the questions that we had was how specific you wanted the policy to contain a process. So, or just basically saying that a majority of the board needed to approve the person who has been nominated, who nominates. I mean, there's a number of questions here. The candidate, actually I'll look at Ann just for a second. The candidate of replacement has to come from the ward of which they're replacing, except in the case of the at-large position. And so commissioners could nominate, they could vote. There's a different, how prescriptive do you want us to get on potential revisions to that process, or if you just want to say the replacements need to be approved by a majority of the board. So that's kind of the question. And then within that policy, were there any other comments or thoughts or questions relative to policy GP7?
Okay, Matt, and then John B2.
Thanks for bringing this back to us, Frank. A couple of things. Yes, I agree that virtual should be considered attending meetings from here on out. I also, well, and then to answer that, or to provide my feedback on one of your other questions there, given the relatively short time frame to replace a commissioner if somebody leaves unexpectedly, I don't think that's the time we want to also be hammering out the process for replacement. So from my perspective, well, I don't really want to be prescriptive. I'd like it to at least be for us to have some clear route for replacement that we all agree on now, with perhaps some ability to amend that process if we decide to. But I just feel like it would be good for us to have a process that's clear. I don't have a process in mind right now, but I, would welcome staff bringing back a couple proposals for what that process might look like. I don't want us to spend a whole bunch of time there, but I do feel like we should have something pretty clear in place. And then in terms of the other policies that I think we should address, there is a statement in here about recordings of the meetings. And I'm of the opinion that we should from here on out provide not only audio recordings, but video recordings. That should be our practice. And it seems like as long as we're doing that, we ought to provide those in the archives as well, not just the audio version. But I would like us to state that it is our intent to do audio, visual, both, and make those available to the public. I just think it helps people understand our conversations and it allows more people to participate. That's all I have. Thanks.
John B.
Thank you. My question would be on the quorum and the board actions. Is that board members present at a meeting, or is that board members? So when we say a quorum be defined as a majority of the entirety board, and then on board actions, if there's only 3 people in a meeting, can 2 people, I mean, there would be a quorum, but a majority would be 2, and would that, I guess that's the question, is it at the meeting or of the commissioners?
The way that it was stated here, Commissioner Borowski, was of the commissioners. So in the case, if you had 4 commissioners and you had 3 of them meet and only 2 voted affirmatively for a measure or an action, that would not pass, in the sense that it would not be a majority of the board passing that. Does that help?
Yeah. So if we had a board meeting and only three commissioners could make it, they could still pass a resolution, but it would have to be a unanimous vote of those 3.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Mindy?
A question about the vacancy on the board and the process to use. I know the 4J school district has done this multiple times and is still doing it, and I'm just wondering if we could find out maybe what their process is. That's a good one. But otherwise, I absolutely agree that we should be able to participate virtually, and I like the other language that you suggested.
Thank you. We can reach out to 4J and see what their process is like. I don't know if it's a good one or not. I haven't been involved in any of those.
They have a lot of practice, I think.
Anything else? Sonia?
Yeah, on the nominations piece, I would like it to not be the board members specifically self-nominating. I think that there's more of an application process, with various questions, information, people apply, and maybe we, board members and others help recruit and encourage people to apply, but it's not necessarily a nomination. And then we as a board vet those applications and choose from that, maybe with some kind of interview process. That would be my suggestion, and maybe that's similar to what the school board has done, somewhat similar to that. But I think if we are each tied to our own person, then it's really hard for us to jump and support maybe the best candidate. That seems tricky to me. I do support the virtual attendance counting, and then on the majority of the board vote, I think it would be, even if we had down a member or such, I think it would still behoove us to be able to do business. However, we need to have a majority of the community supported. So I like the language that you proposed. I think that it still covers that, because we would still need 3 people to be able to get it. That would be a majority of the representation in the community.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the idea on the sort of application process. And I think that's actually probably what I've heard 4J does. Anybody interested in filling this role, go through this process.
So I'll chime in a little bit. I like everything I like about the voting and the attendance virtually and things such as that, about appointing people. I don't know if 90 days is going to be enough if you're going to seek applicants and you're going to have an open period of 30 or 45 days and you're going to have a screening period, and this board that's going to make that decision only meets once a month. And I'm just taking the logistics of that. You may want to think that through. But more importantly, I really like what Sonia said about having an application process, because right now, if, let's just say I quit and each one of you want to appoint somebody, it's going to be somebody that you know, or, you know, something, and they're going to maybe like-minded of you, and we're supposed to represent geographic areas. And if you've lived here long enough, you'll know that we have different political, we have, you know, the values and the beliefs and everything else of different geographic portions of this community are diverse. And to get that diversity, to say wards 4 and 5 are totally different than 1 and 8. I mean, totally different.
And who would represent that? You were the one that was stepping out.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, I think to be fair to the process and be fair to the people that you're replacing would be allowed, at least allow the people to make the application from that geographic area, and then you vet them to see who the one you think best represents the particular people, because you're the voter per se, because the voters don't get to say anymore. And so you have to take that position, and you have to be, you know, I think, fair about the process. So I really like your suggestion.
Okay. I do too. Commissioner Brown, I will say the 90-day requirement is a city charter requirement.
It is a city charter requirement. Well, you're going to have to really move, because think about that. People are going to have to make a decision, and then they're going to have to make the application. You're going to have to review them and make sure, and then the board's going to have to meet, and unless they have these special meetings, it's going to be that quick.
I think that supports Commissioner McCrae's thoughts that it'd be good to have a process defined, given the clock is ticking, the 90 days is ticking. So I think what we'll do is we'll try to regroup and present something back to the board that provides some efficiency in that process, but also demonstrate the sort of the community push of that applicant as opposed to the commissioner select.
Okay, I've got John B2 and then Matt.
Thank you. You know, reference was made to the city charter. I think that's where we could go and look. You know, when a city councilor has this process, they've got it written into the city code. And I think that since we're chartered by the city of Eugene, following their template would be probably one of the best ways to go.
Hey, Matt?
Yeah, and I was just going to add that I don't know how hard it is to change the city charter, but if we did some sort of process that we thought was going to take longer than 90 days, perhaps we asked for that to be 120 days for an EWEB replacement. Maybe that's too much of a battle and not something we want to wade into, but you know, it's a law like anything else, and it can be changed.
Sonia has a comment?
I was just going to note that I think 4J had like 20 plus applicants, and they had to do it pretty quick turnaround. I think the appeal of not having to run a full campaign is actually pretty high if people want to get into it, because then once you're into it, you're an incumbent. And so it's a lot easier once you have that foot in the door. So I don't know that there's as big of a challenge there to recruit. Maybe there is, but if you're not running a full campaign, it seems like you get a lot more people interested.
Matt, I think in response to changing the city charter, if I think, I'm sorry, I kind of snickered a little bit, but I'd do that to change the silt thing in a heartbeat, but I think it takes a vote of the general people to change it, and I think that's a pretty expensive and time-consuming process. People have tried to do it before. Other questions or comments?
Just hopefully it's hypothetical and you don't have to actually do this anytime soon.
Right. Okay, well, if we pass this and get it going, then nobody will resign, and this will all be a moot point. But if we don't, I guarantee you, whoever quits is going to just leave you with a mess. So good.
Are you saying we better get to it?
Well, yeah, time kills deals. You know, you've heard that before.
I've heard that somewhere.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. The next agenda item is board policy correspondence. Frank, stay up there.
I have my correspondence over here. Actually, all the people with the correspondence sitting behind me. Thank you, President Brown. There were 4 items of correspondence this month's packet. Bertelsen property update, which was referenced earlier in the capital discussion. A comment on EWEB education grants and private schools, and what that didn't have in it was the potential idea of since we're the ones who are granting funds to 4J and Springfield and others, is to, and you heard the comments to Tana Shepard, potentially require as part of that contract that they make certain content available to other school districts or homeschooling people, and that's something that we'll have to evaluate. I don't know what other consequences that would have, but that's an option here to look at expanding the reach of the grants that we already provide. And then there was the update on the collective bargaining agreement background and information, and some proposed changes to EL4, policy EL4, related to really bringing that standard on compensation and benefits up to present practice relative to compensation policies. So those were the 4 items of correspondence, and I think we probably have people that can answer questions about them if commissioners need any follow-up.
2, I'll jump the queue if I may. I thought Bertelsen, if we're going to put all that much money in that design into it, I thought Bertelsen was going to also be used for the hydrogen facility.
It is.
It is?
That's correct.
Is that on the south side or the north side, or?
It will be on the northeast corner, on the corner of Bertelsen and Roosevelt.
But that's incorporated in the cost for all this engineering and design that we're doing now?
It's in the planning and the permitting process, and then if there's actual construction costs, that would be borne by.
Okay. And then my second question is on the schools. I mean, we're doing the DEI thing, and the equity thing. If we've got 16 schools and all those schools they're all ratepayers, and to me, everybody that is a ratepayer in the school should be entitled to benefit from this multi-million-dollar educational grants we give. Personally, I don't think it should be just limited to public schools, but that's my own personal thing. I think to make sure that everybody gets a shot at it. I appreciate asking Tana about that today, but I'd just like to get my feedback on that. I think there's some people in the community that are getting a little shortchanged by not getting the benefit of that educational thing. If we're going to educate just the kids in 4J and Bethel and Springfield about environment and all these other things, why not the others? And so, I mean, it's, if you think of why we're doing it, because they're paying into the system, and so that's just my comment. So, others have questions or comments? Matt?
Yeah, I have a quick question about the Bertelsen property. Looks like we're planning a handful of buildings there, mostly storage. And I'm just curious what the seismic standard is for those buildings, if that's life safety or if they're built to a higher standard than that.
We're not to that point of design yet.
Did you hear that, Commissioner McCray? We aren't really at that level of detail. I would suspect most of those buildings, I don't know that they would even be within the standard since they're not housing people. But we would definitely want, if we have essential materials that we're storing, we would want to make sure that those are going to survive the particular conditions that we might be threatened by. So that's kind of a non-answer because it hasn't been designed yet, but I think we get your point that we need to make sure that those are constructed according to proper standards.
Yeah, and I guess I would just put forward again, I know I brought this up in the past, but I feel like we should plan to build everything to be surviving a seismic event unless there's a reason not to. I feel like our default should be that buildings are functional, like they don't have to have power and water and everything, but they have to be standing and usable after an earthquake, not just that you can survive them. And that would apply to any storage that we're building as well. Even if these things aren't currently storing essential items, 10 years down the road, they might be, or we might really need that storage because it's the only covered storage that we have after a seismic event. I just encourage us to lean in and make the default a high seismic standard. And if the other commissioners are open, I'd be interested in making a motion at a future meeting on that, along those lines. That's all I have. Thanks.
John B.
Thanks. I can't see. Is Lena still in the room or is she gone home for the evening?
I'm here.
Lena's here.
So my question was pretty much answered, and that goes to the compensation and benefits, and the fact that if you give compensation to one person, everybody in the organization has to be compensated unless there's merit-based things. So what I'm hoping is, one, if the sunset on the exemption for that is in September. So if we're trying to use incentivized bonuses to bring in people, let's try and do that as much as we can before September. And then the second thing is, I hope that our adjacent in our government relations advocacy is advocating to extend that. I know that other industry groups have to give incentive bonuses. That would go against the equal pay law that was passed pre-pandemic. And I'm just wondering if there's any action on our end to try and get that extended.
I am not prepared to answer that this evening. I'd have to check in to see if there's any buzz about it at the legislature. I can check in with Jason and respond back.
Thank you.
Commissioner Borowski, I know there was a pretty extensive response to some of your questions earlier about EL4 in the Q&A correspondence. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that as well.
Yeah, I did, and you do most of the things to be able to compensate people differently, but there are going to be limitations to that as far as signing bonuses and retention type bonuses that may have an effect on the organization with this new law. And so I just want to make sure that we are keeping tabs on it and also trying to influence the legislature to allow us to use bonuses and incentives to get the employees that we need without having to raise the pay of every employee in the organization. That's what I'm hoping for.
Any other questions or comments regarding correspondence? If not, then I'm going to move to board wrap-up. And board.
Comment on upcoming agendas.
Go ahead.
So on upcoming agendas, we do have a meeting on the 16th relative to wildfire and Lieberg updates, but also I will be working with President Brown and Vice President Carlson on an added topic to the July agenda, which will be to review our responses to the City of Eugene relative to questions they have sent us on electrification. So I thought I would make specific note of that. July will probably be a pretty healthy, robust agenda. We will not be doing board wrap up at 7:35 likely on July 5th. So just a heads up on that, and then a number of other activities planned throughout the summer. So thank you, President Brown.
Okay. Now I'll go to board and wrap up. Anything for the good of the order? Eddie? Sonia? John B2? Matt? I've got two things. I know that we're going to go public on the emergency water system in Matt's region shortly. I'm concerned about nobody knowing about it other than a few people. What public outreach have we done? I mean, no ads in the weekly or public notices or anything else, because it's great to build these facilities, but if people don't know they exist and know where they are and how they work, why build them? And so I'm hoping that we have a robust, very good outreach to the public to say, this is it. If we're going to have an emergency, stop by Saturday, 10 to 2, see how it works, see where it is and everything else. And I don't know if we're doing that, but if we're not, I would hope that we could do it. And if we're doing it, maybe it's just the outreach is directed to that particular geographic area, but I haven't heard anything about it other than what you told us.
I'll check on a couple of things. The specific outreach for this event, I'll find out about, but I know on a regular basis, whether it be through some of our resiliency work and communications or publications associated with bill inserts and other stuff, we're constantly publishing the maps of those emergency sites as well, since there are multiple of those. And so we'll do a follow-up for you.
Yeah, I can't stress that too much to say that let's make sure that everybody has the opportunity to at least know about it, because if this thing hits tomorrow, in 24 hours, people say, where's my water? And just I'd rather be too much than not enough on that particular topic. The other thing I have is for the board. It's halfway through my tenure here, and the only way I think people in this position can get better is to get feedback. And so I'm soliciting feedback, not now because I get embarrassed, but seriously, sometime if you guys want to shoot me an email and say, I don't like your antics, I don't like the way you run a meeting, or you can do it better, tell me how we can do this better, if you think we can do it better, because I'm going to be here 5 more times and I'm done. And, but just want to say that whoever takes this position, Mindy, or excuse me, Sonia, maybe, that it only gets better with feedback, and positive or negative, that's okay, I don't care. But I just wanted to offer that to others so we can do that, because if you want more dialogue amongst us, if you want a different format, if you want better food, just say it and we'll see what we can do. All right, is there anything else for the good of the order?
The other thing is the board does have a board retreat dinner coming up this summer, so they could give you their feedback directly.
Yeah, but if I ask for it, it's not as bad if they just come say things.
Fair
It's a little easier to do it that way.
Fair enough.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? John B. or Matt? You guys good? All right, John B. too, get better, get weller. All right, we'll see you. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Flyer would be great, like not a virtual flyer, but